They danced for days, for weeks, until their bodies gave out. This wasn't a celebration. It was a terrifying, uncontrollable urge, gripping entire towns in a bizarre, relentless frenzy. Imagine hundreds, even thousands, moving without rest, their minds lost to the rhythm, their feet pounding the earth until blood stained the streets. The dancing mania, or St. Vitus dance as it was sometimes known, wasn't a solitary oddity. It was a series of horrifying epidemics, sweeping across medieval Europe, leaving a trail of exhaustion, injury, and even death in its wake. A truly bizarre chapter in human history. Everyone thinks epidemics are about disease, about pathogens, viruses, or bacteria. But what if an epidemic could be? Of movement. Of a strange, irresistible compulsion that defies all logic and explanation, spreading through communities like a fever dream. Our story begins in the summer of 1518 in Strasbourg, a bustling city in the Holy Roman Empire. A woman named Frau Trophia stepped into the street and began to dance. Not a graceful waltz or a celebratory jig, but a frantic, unstoppable movement. She danced for hours, then days. Bystanders watched, perplexed, perhaps amused at first. But her movements grew more desperate, her face contorted with exertion and what observers later described as agony. She couldn't stop. Within a week, dozens more joined her. Men, women, children, caught in the same inexplicable trance. They danced in the market squares, in the narrow alleys, their numbers swelling, their collective movements becoming a terrifying, rhythmic pulse that consumed the city. The authorities, initially bewildered, tried to intervene. They brought musicians, thinking perhaps that music would help regulate the movements or even tire the dancers out. But it only seemed to intensify the madness, fueling the frenetic energy. Some historians claim that up to 400 people were affected in Strasbourg alone. Many danced until they collapsed from exhaustion, heart attack, or stroke. Imagine the sheer terror, the helplessness, as your own body betrays you, forcing you into a dance to the death. But Strasbourg wasn't an isolated incident. Records stretching back to the 10th century describe similar outbreaks. In 1374, towns along the Rhine and Moselle rivers saw hundreds of people dancing uncontrollably, often invoking the name of St. Vitus. Why St. Vitus? He was a Christian martyr, believed to protect against chorea, a neurological disorder characterized by involuntary movements. People suffering from the mania would often appeal to him, hoping for relief from their strange affliction. One of the earliest and most dramatic accounts comes from the town of Erfurt in 1237, where a large group of children danced their way to the town of Arnstadt, supposedly collapsing from exhaustion and even dying along the way. A tragic, almost mythical journey. So, what caused this bizarre phenomenon? For centuries, explanations ranged from demonic possession to a curse from St. Vitus himself. These were times when the line between the spiritual and the physical was incredibly blurred. Modern theories offer more scientific, though still debated, possibilities. One prominent theory points to ergotism, a poisoning caused by consuming bread made from rye infected with the ergot fungus. This fungus produces alkaloids that are chemically similar to LSD. Symptoms of ergotism include convulsions, hallucinations, and a burning sensation in the limbs, sometimes called St. Anthony's fire. Could this explain the uncontrollable movements and the almost trance-like state of the dancers? However, critics of the ergotism theory point out that the symptoms of the dancing mania, specifically the continuous, organized dancing, don't perfectly align with known ergot poisoning. While it explains convulsions, it struggles with the sustained, rhythmic movement. Another compelling explanation suggests a form of mass psychogenic illness, or mass hysteria. In times of extreme stress, famine, disease, and superstition, psychological factors can manifest as physical symptoms across a community. The Middle Ages were rife with hardship. Plagues, famines, constant warfare, and deep religious fervor created an environment where the collective psyche was incredibly vulnerable. Imagine living in a world where death was a constant, looming shadow. The stress, fear, and anxieties could have created a fertile ground for a shared delusion, a physical manifestation of collective trauma. Perhaps the dancing offered a strange, cathartic release, even as it led to exhaustion and collapse. In Strasbourg, the authorities eventually resorted to a desperate measure. They constructed stages and hired more musicians, not to stop the dancing, but to encourage it. They believed that if the dancers simply exhausted themselves, they would recover. They even opened guild halls and granted the dancers access. This seemingly counterintuitive approach might have worked as a form of exposure therapy, allowing the compulsion to run its course in a somewhat controlled environment. By September 1518, the dancing plague in Strasbourg began to subside. The afflicted were eventually led to shrines, particularly that of St. Vitus, where prayers and rituals were performed. Slowly, painfully, the city returned to a semblance of normalcy. The dancing mania stands as a stark reminder of how deeply intertwined our minds and bodies are, and how profoundly societal stress can impact collective health. It's a bizarre, unsettling chapter, often overlooked, in the history of human suffering. It forces us to consider the unseen threats, not just of disease, but of societal pressures, fear, and collective psychology that can manifest in the most extraordinary and terrifying ways. What other hidden historical epidemics are we yet to fully understand? Explore more forgotten curiosities that shaped our world by clicking the video on your screen now.